Hey guys, welcome to the compression tutorial. In this video I'm going to teach you what compression is, what it's used for, how it works, and the effect that it can have on your sounds if used properly. Compression is a very valuable tool that can help you accomplish many different things. For example, it can help you make sounds perceivably louder or stand out more in the mix. It can help you sort of smooth out the dynamics and give the sound a more balanced presence, and we're going to talk about what that means in just a second. And it can also help gel different sounds together and make them sound more cohesive, for example like a kick drum and a bass line, or even an entire track in the mixdown or mastering process. Now, before we get into it, there's one concept you absolutely need to know before you can understand compression, and that is dynamic range. Dynamic range is the difference between the loudest and the quietest part of a sound. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to bring up the clap that FL Studio gives you in the default template. And just by looking at this waveform, I can tell that a sound like this has a high dynamic range. And the reason I can tell is because the loudest part of the sound, right here, the transient, is a lot different from the quietest part of the sound, which is somewhere way down here. So a sound like this that sort of bangs in and then fades out over time is said to have a high dynamic range. In contrast, if we look at this kick drum, we can tell that it has a low, or at least lower, dynamic range than the clap. And the reason we can tell is because the highest point, or the loudest point of this sound right here, is pretty close to a majority of the rest of the sound, which is the sub body of this kick right here. There's a little dip here and a dip kind of towards the end, but a majority of the sample is fairly close to the loudest point of the sound. So a sample like this is said to have a low or lower dynamic range. Now that we understand that, hopefully, if not, let me know in the comments below, we can go ahead and define compression. What is compression? Compression is the process of changing or lowering the dynamic range of a sound. Looking back at our clap sample, if you can picture the dynamic range of this sample being lower, either by these peaks right up here and these right here being dropped down to about this level here, or by this midsection towards the end being raised up to match close to what these peaks are, then you just pictured a compressed version of the sample. And that's what we're going to do next. So for this example, I'm going to program in a couple of claps so we have some audio to work with. And on the mixer track for the clap, I'm going to load up my favorite compressor, and that is the Fruity Limiter. Now, don't be confused by the name. The Fruity Limiter has a compressor built in, and that's accessed from this comp tab. The reason why I like this compressor so much is mainly because of the visual feedback that it offers. And I know that, audio engineering is supposed to be based on your ears and based on sound, but the visual feedback that you get from something like this plugin can drastically help with honing in on roughly the right values that you'll want, and then from there your ears can kind of take over and fine-tune those values. And also it really helps me explain and show you guys this compressor stuff when you can actually see what it's doing. So I mentioned honing in on values. What did I mean by that? Well, first of all, don't be scared by all the knobs on this compressor. We're only going to worry about 3 of them for now. And those 3 are threshold, ratio, and gain. The most fundamental controls on any compressor. Alright, I'm going to get rid of some of the stuff that we don't need, like the mixer and the channel rack. And I'm going to increase the resolution on this compressor and just make the window a little bigger so we can see what's going on. Now, I'm going to play this sample, then I'm going to compress it, and then I'm going to tell you what I did. Okay. WTF did I just do? The first thing I did was play the sample back. No compression, no effects, nothing. Just played it through the compressor and we could see the waveform. And the waveform that we were seeing is essentially the waveform we looked at earlier. The only difference is between this waveform and this one is that this waveform is basically both of the bottom and the top half combined. So if you can imagine this bottom half of the waveform kind of folded up on top of the top half, that's what we're seeing here. It's just a simpler view to look at the same thing. Now, what I did next was drop the threshold, increase the ratio, and then increase the gain. Let's talk through each of those. So, what's the threshold? The threshold is this blue line that you see going across here. And right now it's sitting at negative 21.9 dB if you look up in the top left. So, the threshold is basically the level that you tell the compressor to start compressing at. So if your threshold isn't low enough or your sample isn't loud enough to meet the threshold, you're not going to get any compression. The compressor is just going to sit there waiting for the threshold to be crossed. Once you have a low enough threshold or a sample that's loud enough to pass that threshold value in decibels, you'll start getting compression if you have a ratio set that is not 1:1. By default, a ratio is 1:1. So when I moved this up, I moved it up to 2:1. And what that means is for every 2 decibels that crosses the threshold that we set over here, give me 1 decibel back in return. So the higher the ratio, the more compression is going to take place. So if I set the ratio to 5:1, for every 5 decibels that crosses the threshold, I only get 1 decibel back. So that's a more extreme version of compression than the 2:1 ratio. So the moment I started increasing the ratio to 2:1, we started hearing compression. And for every part of this sample that crossed the threshold, which are these peaks right here, which are the ones I was targeting by setting the correct threshold, they started getting only 1 decibel in return for every 2 that they were crossing the threshold level. And that is why the volume started decreasing as I increased the ratio. Now, how is compression supposed to make stuff louder or more present in the mix? Well, down here, if you picture kind of your thumb and your index finger squeezing this first bit of the sound to kind of match the level of this middle, that's essentially what we did with the ratio and the threshold. Now, in order to make this loud again, we need to bring the whole sample's level back up to what it was in the beginning. And that's what I did with this gain knob. And that's called make up gain. You make up the lost gain from the compression that you applied to the parts that crossed the threshold. And so now with the compressed version of the sample, this middle chunk is going to come through the mix a lot more than it did before, because now this middle chunk is closer to the volume of this first bit. And that is how you make stuff louder with compression. And from here, what we can do is we can hit this button in the bottom right to flip with the B state, and that will reset the compressor to a default state. And so now when I play it back, I can see what it sounds like without compression. And then when I hit this button again, I can hear it with compression. So you can hear the effect. Let's take a listen. Here's the uncompressed version. And there's the compressed version. So that's a handy way to kind of tell what kind of effect all your tweaking did, is to have an A-B compare. And so finally what I'm going to do is show you the difference visually between the original clap and the compressed clap. So here we have the original, and here is the compressed version. Well, thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully this video helped you understand compression a little bit better. If you have any questions or there's something that's still unclear to you, please let me know below. I'll be happy to help. If you have any suggestions for future tutorials you'd like to see, please leave that feedback as well. Otherwise, if you found this video helpful, please give it a like and consider subscribing, because there'll be much more awesome tutorials to come. Thanks for watching, and catch you in the next video.